In today's video, we are going to be subjecting ourselves to a game, and more specifically a move, played only days ago by the greatest wood pusher of our time, Magnus Carlsen, that is among the most baffling that I've ever seen him play. And it's one of those moves that you look at and you just say, no, humans don't play that. That's a computer move. That's a move you discover after the game's over when you're analyzing with Stockfish, and you don't even feel bad about not playing it because you're human. Unlike Magnus Carlsen, who is something more than human. He may still have some human in him. I don't believe the transformation is yet fully complete. You know, he does still make mistakes from time to time, and even makes a few in this game. But when Magnus is under whatever terrifying influence that enables him to find moves like the shocking queen sacrifice you're about to see him play in this game, it really makes you question everything you thought you knew about what constitutes a forced move. And you know that feeling you get when you can't quite figure something out and then you see the answer and you feel kind of stupid? Well, if you're anything like me, that's a feeling you're not going to get in this game. You're going to be like, okay, whatever. What kind of healthy red-blooded hominid is ever going to play that? And it is a very valid question. But let's get into the chess. This game is from the first round of the ongoing Speed Chess Championship, in which Magnus Carlsen played a series of games against the 76th best player in the world, Peruvian Grandmaster Jose Martinez, 8 of which were 5 + 1 minute blitz, 1 of which was this game. Jose Martinez is in command of the Ivory Army, and he opens with e4. Magnus defends in the most ancestral way possible, d5, the Scandinavian. Stockfish is already grimacing. There's nothing it hates more than the fact that it's never quite been able to refute this opening, except for the existence of Lutefisk, of course. Jose makes the capture on d5, as 97% of all master players do in this position. Black's now got a couple of options that don't suck, the most popular being queen takes d5, but Magnus goes for the slightly less common knight to f6, hitting white's marooned pawn a second time. Jose, not being a rank beginner, knows better than to try to defend his pawn with a move like c4, when black can just keep attacking it with c6, and if you take on c6, then black gets to recapture with the knight, taking a nice lead in piece development, which, along with his better pawn structure due to white's backward d-pawn, pretty much equalizes the position. What's played is the much more theoretically sound knight to f3, Magnus takes on d5, and now, to the surprise of no one, comes d4, staking a central claim and releasing the brunette bishop. It is the best move in the position. Magnus puts his blonde bishop on g4, pinning knight to queen. Jose says, whatever, I can just unpin with my bishop, as dictated by opening theory, and after e6, I can harass yours with h3. Magnus now has his choice of 3 reasonable moves. He could take the knight on f3, giving up the bishop pair for no compelling reason. He could play bishop to f5 and then try to make the argument that h3 did more to harm white's position than to help it. Otherwise, why wouldn't he have just moved his bishop to f5 to begin with? Or he could play what's played in the game, bishop to h5. Now, by far the most common thing for white to do in this position is to just castle. But Jose plays an immediate c4, posing unto Magnus another theoretical quandary. Will you immediately retreat your knight, or will you take the opportunity to throw in a check with the move Magnus now plays, bishop to b4 check? So what do you think? Is this a good move, and how should white respond? Well, if you put any stock in the evaluation of Stockfish after it's calculated over 3 billion moves reaching a search depth of 46, then the answer is an emphatic no. Bishop to b4 check is not a good move, as it allows white to gain a sizable advantage, perhaps even winning, with a very counterintuitive reply, now played by Jose, king to f1. And if you're scratching your head wondering how a move like this, which is normally quite weak, forever giving up the right to castle, could possibly be white's strongest response, well, all I can say is, you better get used to it, because this game is chock full of such counterintuitions. And this position is actually reminiscent of an opening trap that I've had a lot of success with in my own games, even against some pretty strong opposition. I'll go ahead and show it to you after the game, so make sure to stick around for that, if scoring easy wins with little to no effort is something to interest you. But what's the deal with this king to f1 move? How could this possibly be better than blocking the check by putting a piece on d2? Well, it all comes down to the fact that black's bishop is left on a very vulnerable square, with no option to trade itself off for a piece on d2. And if Jose were to go full Tom Cruise from here and find all the right moves, then he could actually win that bishop, and you might already have an idea of how he can do it. Okay, so Magnus needs to deal with the attack on his d5 knight. He puts it on f6, and now we get a move that indicates that this was probably not any special engine preparation by Jose, because if it was, he surely would have played the correct move here, c5. blocking the bishop's escape route and so threatening to simply trap it with a3 followed by b4. Bishop to a5 is black's best response, with the idea of playing c6 next to both defend the bishop and give it a new route to safety. But now comes b4, forcing black to take the pawn, followed by queen to a4 check, forcing black to play knight to c6 to both block the check and defend the bishop. And now, for 65 points, which is the most that I've ever offered, what do you think white should play in this position? Well, if you jumped the gun and said bishop to b5, don't feel bad, because the correct move is far from obvious. You actually have to play a3. And the reason you got to throw in this move is that it drives the bishop to a5, giving the queen a view of d4. Now you can play bishop to b5. Black has no bishop takes knight on f3, followed by queen takes pawn on d4, which would defend the bishop if it were still sitting on b4, with an attack on the a1 rook. So what's recommended for black here is queen to d5, and after white takes the bishop on a5, which black had no way to save, and which of course was not defended by the knight as it's pinned to the king. The engine is saying that while black is somewhat compensated for his lost piece, having the extra pawn, a king that can still castle, and very active pieces with pressure on both f3 and d4, white is nevertheless the much preferred side and quite possibly winning. So as much as I like to promote healthy skepticism, never question the engine unless you enjoy getting put in your place with crazy variations such as this. Not at all surprising that Jose was unable to unravel this mess, which actually would have been winning for black had it not been for white's move a3. What's played in the game, after Magnus retreats his knight to f6, is not the correct c5, but rather a3, attacking the bishop right away, allowing it to escape in the direction from whence it came, with bishop to e7 now played by Magnus. Next we have some normal developing moves that don't require much commentary, other than to say that they might not require any commentary. c5 is noteworthy though, hitting Jose's center, asking him if he'd rather play like an engine and push his pawn to d5, or play like a flawed mortal and capture the pawn on c5. As you can see, he's chosen the latter, and after Magnus recaptures with his bishop, we have a virtually equal position. Jose now puts his knight on d4. It's a fine move, bringing the light-haired snipers into contact. A small red dot suddenly appears on each of their foreheads. Always an awkward situation. So Magnus decides to prevent their mutual annihilation with bishop to g6. The engine's not a fan. It slightly preferred bishop takes e2 for reasons we're not going to even concern ourselves with. Jose now claims some queenside territory with b4 hitting the bishop, and after it drops back to e7, he plays c5 expanding further, opening the western stairwell for his white-haired cleric. Magnus castles to the east. Jose puts his king on g1, headed to h2 so that he can get his rook on h1 into the game. Magnus now plays a strong move, a5, looking to break down that oppressive queenside pawn structure of white's. Jose just ignores it. He puts his king on h2 as if nothing happened. Now, if Magnus were firing on all cylinders in this position, he would surely play something like queen to b8 with check, and after white's best response g3, he would follow up with h5, looking to bite into the white king's castle with h4 next. But Magnus is not yet operating at full capacity, as evidenced by his decision to play the highly dubious b6, giving Jose the opportunity to attain a powerful and quite troublesome passed pawn with the move c6. Why he doesn't play it, I couldn't rightly tell you. In the words of the good warden Samuel Norton, he must have seen something. Probably the move he plays next, bishop to f4, which looks quite dangerous in its own right, taking control of this sensitive diagonal leading to his king, thus enabling him to meet Magnus's next move, a takes b4, with knight to c6, forking queen and bishop without losing his knight to queen to c7 check. And it very well could be that Jose thought he was winning here. Magnus's queen is under attack, and he's got to put it on e8, right? That's the only way to keep his bishop defended. Then after the recapture on b4 and a pair of rooks come off the board, what are you doing about knight takes e7 followed by bishop to d6, winning the exchange? Or even just knight takes e7 followed by c6, getting that passed pawn with tempo on the knight and then backing it up with b5 next. You can try b takes c5, but then comes b5, and with it a whole lot of trouble. White's now got the passed b pawn, while black is all tied up in a defensive posture, and according to the engine, quite comfortably losing. Which might sound like a strange way to put it, but it can be a bit of a relief when you realize that the struggle is finally over, and you can resign with a clear conscience, and then go try to relax and forget it ever happened. But this is not what happened in the game, where after Jose's move knight to c6, Magnus does not play the move that the vast majority, if not all other bipedal chess players in the world would surely assume is forced, queen to e8. He leaves his queen right where it is, and instead captures the knight on c3. A decision that, when I was first looking at this game, just totally baffled me, and which still has me kind of baffled. I mean, how is this not just losing after Jose's obvious reply, knight takes queen, when after rook takes d8, Magnus is left with only 2 minor pieces for his queen, which under normal circumstances is not nearly enough. But you know who's not baffled by this queen sacrifice? Well, Magnus Carlsen for one, but also the all-seeing engine, which, believe it or not, is actually favoring black, giving Magnus an advantage worth about half a pawn. So how could this possibly be? Well, for one thing, Magnus now has a very powerful passed pawn of his own, ready to push to c2 at a moment's notice, defended by the bishop. He's also threatening knight takes c5 with a discovery on the white queen. He can post his other knight on the beautiful d5 square with tempo on the bishop. Now as white, I would probably want to play c6 here, but the engine condemns it, saying that white should instead play b6. Apparently so that after the knight recaptures, there's no longer any knight to c5, as that would be a quite restrictive post, depriving white's queen of its only good square for the moment, which is b3. And that's about all I got for you. It still feels to me like white should be winning here, but apparently black's extra pawn, along with his very active minor pieces, is more than sufficient compensation for his lost queen. So let's see how Jose responds to this odd turn of events. He plays bishop to f3. A move which, despite attacking the rook on a8, is actually a losing blunder, as it allows Magnus to capture the pawn on c5, with the discovered counterattack on the white queen. Now, did Jose simply miss this move? No. He's decided he's going to trade his queen for both of Magnus's rooks, with bishop takes a8. Magnus, of course, takes the queen, and after the rook recaptures, what are we left with? Well, both sides have 2 bishops, black has 2 knights, and white has 2 rooks. So Jose is 2 exchanges up. Of course, Magnus does have the 2 extra pawns, though normally this shouldn't be enough. And a quick material count reveals that white has a total of 2 extra pawns worth of wood. But what he doesn't have is a passed pawn that's only 2 steps away from promotion, and which can now be pushed 1 step closer, as Magnus now does with the move c2, hitting the rook on d1, defended by the bishop. And just to give you an idea of how valuable the engine considers this pawn to be, consider this. Stockfish is giving black a 2-pawn advantage in this position, which if you do the math, would seem to indicate that it thinks this pawn on c2 is worth 5 pawns. Jose thinks he can manage the situation though. He puts his rook on d4. It is a good try. He's looking to keep that pawn under control in the most active way possible by putting his rook on c4 next, keeping c1 guarded by both of his rooks as well as the bishop on f4. So having said that, you might be able to guess what black's best move is in this position. It's actually his only winning move. Pause the video if you'd like to try and spot it. The winning move, not played by Magnus, is b5, just keeping the rook out of c4, and restricting it so severely that black is actually threatening to trap it with knight to b3 next. What Magnus plays in the game, instead of the winning b5, is knight to d3, throwing away his entire winning advantage. Now this move looks pretty decent on the surface. He's threatening knight takes bishop, when after rook takes bishop, there'd be bishop to d6, pinning the rook to the king. But after Jose drops his bishop back to e3, black's got nothing better than equality. And that's only if Magnus plays his best move, which is still b5, keeping the rook out of c4. It's no longer winning, for reasons that include but are not limited to the fact that in some lines white can sacrifice his rook for the knight on d3, eliminating black's important controller of the c1 promotion square, a move that wouldn't be possible if black had left his knight on c5 and played b5 straight away like he should have. And I'm sure there's a lot more to it than that, but we're not going to agonize too heavily over why playing b5 now as opposed to a move ago is so much inferior, because Magnus doesn't even play b5. He plays h6. Can't say that I blame him. I mean, who doesn't want a flight square for their king so that after their opponent plays rook to c4, attacking their pawn on c2, they can play knight to b2, attacking the rook while defending the pawn with their bishop, and then meet rook to c8 check, now played by Jose, with king to h7, as opposed to the self-pinning bishop to f8, which would have been necessary if this move h6 had not been played. It all looks pretty sensible. Magnus is now threatening to pick up the pawn on a3, but Jose pays it no mind, because he's seen that after rook to c1 and bishop takes a3 from Magnus, threatening a discovered attack on his rook, he's able to now tip the balance in his favor by giving back an exchange with rook takes c2. When after bishop takes c2 and rook takes c2, the material has returned to equilibrium. Black has his 2 pawns for the exchange, but one of those pawns is currently under attack, and with a couple of his pieces kind of weirdly situated over here on the edge of the board, the engine is now cheering for Team White. I don't know if Black is quite losing, but what is known is that Magnus needs to address the attack on his b6 pawn. He pushes it to b5, bishop to d4 is next, improving the bishop while hitting the knight on b2 with the second piece. It flees to c4. We have bishop to c6 attacking the b pawn again. Knight to d6 defends. Bishop to b5 attacks the defender, although it doesn't really threaten anything, since if the bishop were to take on d6, then the recapture would come with check, which may be part of the reason that the engine liked king to g1 better. And it's now actually recommending knight to g8 for Black, a move that I don't even want to dignify with any commentary. I mean, how is it worth expending 2 moves just to get the knight to e7? Or is that even the plan? Who even knows? The engine's ways are definitely not our ways. What Magnus plays is the much more natural looking knight to d5, which is apparently losing due to another disgusting computer line not played in the game. Bishop takes d5, e takes d5, rook to c3, attacking 2 pieces at once, knight to c4, defending the bishop, attacking White's bishop, rook to d3, pressuring d5, which White isn't really threatening to take yet due to the threat of knight takes bishop, rook takes knight, and bishop to e5, pinning the rook to the king. White needs to be able to meet knight takes e5 with rook takes bishop on a3. So a still hideously complicated position, but judging by the engine's eval bar, it seems that Black's queenside pawns have become more of a liability than an asset and will eventually be dispatched from the board, giving White the win. In the game, however, Jose does not seize his final opportunity for a winning advantage with bishop takes d5, but rather plays g3, blocking the dark square diagonal to his king. Maybe he's thinking about bishop takes d6, when Black's recapture will not be coming with check, and then he can take on b5. But this gives Magnus a very nice equalizing sequence of moves, beginning with knight to c4, attacking the bishop on e5, while blocking the rook's defense of the bishop on c6. Now objectively, the best try might be something like rook to e2, just defending the bishop, but Jose, now being in severe time trouble, decides to move his bishop to d4, allowing knight to b4, forking his undefended rook and bishop on c6, thus forcing him to sacrifice the exchange with rook takes c4, and after b takes c4, being 2 pawns down with no exchange to show for it, and having a light square bishop that is under attack, Jose seems destined to lose this game. There is still hope, however, if and only if he plays... Care to guess what the move is? It's not too difficult. What White needs to play is bishop to b5, attacking the pawn, which Black has no way to save. He can throw in knight to c2, hitting the other bishop, and after bishop to c3, maybe bishop to c5, attacking f2, planning knight to a3 next to defend c4. But do you want to know a secret? Do you promise not to tell? Oh. Okay, sorry you had to hear that. But the secret is this. White can actually just go ahead and grab on c4. For if Black were to take the pawn on f2, then he would lose his knight to bishop to d3 with check. So the moral of the story is that in this position, you should always play bishop to b5, securing the draw, as opposed to what Jose plays in the game, which is the utterly losing bishop to a4. And if you're wondering why this was played instead of the obvious bishop to b5, attacking the pawn on c4, well, I think the fact that Jose was down to only a couple seconds on his clock will probably be sufficient explanation for most of you, but in case it's not, we can further speculate on how much time per day Jose devotes to honing his mouse manipulating skills, which in these kinds of time scrambling scenarios can be almost as important as one's chess playing ability. So what I'm trying to say, using as many words as possible, is that this may have been a mouse slip. And after Magnus's response, knight to d5, Jose will not be winning the pawn on c4 and will therefore not enjoy the excellent drawing chances that he would have had if he were only 1 pawn down in material as opposed to being 2 pawns down as he is here. And so in this position, whether intentionally or by design, Jose now loses the game on time. So what a game. Did that one not check all of the boxes for you? Or even create some new boxes that you didn't even know existed? I'm still trying to wrap my head around that queen sacrifice. I mean, who plays that in a blitz game? Or in any game? I'm so sure. But anyway, as promised, it's now time to show you my all-time favorite opening trap, beginning with this position, which I'm sure will look pretty familiar to most of you. You're in charge of the white pieces and you open with e4. because it was the favorite move of Bobby Fischer, who you've been a big fan of ever since the early 90s when you first saw the movie Searching for Bobby Fischer. Up until about the year 2001 anyway, when it became crystal clear that Bobby Fischer was definitely someone you wouldn't want to be, though you could still fully appreciate his incredible chess playing ability. And of course, when I say you, I really mean me, but I think it's a pretty common story. Your opponent responds e5, and after knight to f3, knight to c6, bishop to b5, and bishop to c5, known as the classical variation of this Ruy Lopez opening, you're going to play c3, planning d4 next. Now, if your opponent has studied this opening at all, they'll most likely play knight to f6 here. But now and then, and when I say now and then, what I mean is in about 27% of all online games that reach this position, Black will go for the highly dubious d6, which incredibly loses an entire piece, to your response, which is d4 attacking the bishop. Now, if Black puts his bishop on b6, then you're going to play d5, winning the knight on c6, since a6 can be met with bishop to a4, maintaining the pin, there's no b5 to counterattack, and Black is most thoroughly hosed. So what most players will try, after you play d4, is e takes d4. When after c takes d4, if they now play bishop to b6, then again, you're going to play d5, when after a6 and bishop to a4, there's bishop to a5 check, to which you're going to respond with the move that might look a bit familiar, b4. Now, if bishop takes b4 check is played, I think you could probably guess White's winning move. You got it, king to f1. The pinned knight on c6 is still under attack. Black can play b5, counterattacking the bishop on a4, but here we have d takes c6, b takes a4, and now queen to d4, threatening both queen takes bishop and queen takes pawn on g7, and White will be winning material. If in this position Black instead plays b5 straight away, then we have b takes a5, b takes a4, and queen takes a4, winning the pinned knight on c6. Okay, so getting back to this position, if Black immediately delivers check with bishop to b4 check, then you just go ahead with your beautiful king to f1 move, and one way or another, Black's going to be dropping a piece. The threat is simply queen to a4, followed by bishop takes c6, and then queen takes bishop, or even just queen takes bishop straight away as the knight is pinned. And there's a number of things that Black can try. They all fail. Let's first look at bishop to d7, breaking the pin on the knight. This doesn't help anything after queen to a4, threatening to take and take. Black can try a5, defending the bishop, but after a3, that bishop has run out of squares and will be lost. If Black instead tries d5 to give the bishop an escape route, well, here we have queen to b3. And after bishop to e7, there's e takes d5, attacking the pinned knight. The pawn's defended by the queen. Black can try a6, but then check this out. D takes c6, a takes b5, c takes b7 with the fork. So bishop takes b7 is forced. And now comes queen takes b5 with check, picking up the bishop on b7. Okay, what's next? Black can try a6 immediately, but after bishop takes c6 check, b takes c6, and queen to a4, hitting the trapped bishop, a5 defending, and a3. Once again, Black's bishop has nowhere to run and will be lost. Now, Black can throw in this tricky move bishop to b7, which if White were to immediately play a takes b4, it would run him into a big disaster with a takes b4 hitting the queen, and after it moves, rook takes rook on a1. So you got to play something like queen to c2, leaving Black with his trapped bishop on b4 and no way to save it. So I think that covers the main variations of this quite remarkable trap. Please forgive me if I've omitted any significant lines, but it's a great little trap to have in your opening arsenal, and I think you'll be surprised at how often you'll be able to use it. I've even had opponents with online ratings upwards of 2,000 fall for this before. So anyway, thank you for watching until the very end. The algorithm loves you, as do I. Hit that like button if you liked anything you saw or heard here today. Consider subscribing to the channel for more content like this delivered to you on a regular basis, and I will see you soon.